As the cold and gray days of winter start to roll in, my thoughts, as far as food goes, turn to comfort food. And the top food on my list of comfort food is bread. So today, I want to share with you a recipe for honey oat bread that I'm making in my bread machine. And I know you're going to love it as much as my family loves this honey oat bread. I'm measuring out 360 grams. It's approximately 3 cups of all-purpose flour for this recipe. So this recipe does not use bread flour. We're using all-purpose flour plus 1 cup of oats, old-fashioned oats. You're going to love that the ingredients for this recipe are so accessible. In addition to the all-purpose flour and the old-fashioned oats, you're going to need some honey, 3 tablespoons of honey, salt, 1.5 teaspoons of salt, unsalted butter, 4 tablespoons of unsalted butter, and bread machine yeast. That's 2 1/4 teaspoons of bread machine yeast. And some water. We always start out with our water, and this is going to be 1 cup and maybe just a couple extra tablespoons because it's winter and low humidity in my neck of the woods. 1 cup of warm water, not hot, lukewarm water. We're going to add the water first into the bowl of the bread machine. And then we're going to add the salt. Now remember that you want to keep the salt away from your yeast. So you put it in with the wet ingredients. And 3 tablespoons of honey. Now your bread needs sugar. The yeast needs sugar in order to work its magic on your bread. So don't skimp on your sugar. Next, add your butter. The butter is soft. The 360 grams of all-purpose flour. 1 cup of rolled oats. And then I like to just smooth out the dry ingredients. Just take a little knife and smooth them out. And then sprinkle in your 2 1/4 teaspoons of bread machine yeast. Now today I'm making this bread machine bread using the dough cycle because I prefer my bread when I bake it in the oven in a traditional loaf pan. It looks like I spent hours making the bread, and it's going to be just so easy to do. So close up the lid of the bread machine. I'm going to select the dough cycle and start the process. While your bread machine is doing all the work, you can grease your loaf pan. And because this is a 2-pound loaf of bread, I am using a 9-inch loaf pan, a metal loaf pan. I find that metal is preferred over glass or ceramic when I make bread. And I'm using a solid shortening with a paper towel just to rub it into all the edges and the corners. And we're all set. When your dough has formed a ball, you want to give it a poke for consistency. You don't want it to stick to your fingers. You want it to have some firmness, but not too firm. If it's too wet, add a little bit of flour, a teaspoon at a time. If it's too dry, add a little bit of water, a teaspoon at a time. At the completion of your dough cycle, put a little bit of olive oil on your hand to make it easier for you to manipulate the dough. And you want to remove the dough from your bread maker. Make sure that you leave the paddle in the pan. And then form a loaf and place your bread dough into your prepared pan. And then spray a piece of plastic wrap with a little bit of oil and place the plastic wrap over the loaf pan. And you're going to let your bread rise for 30 minutes to an hour until you get a nice shape onto your dough. Preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit and wait for the dough to rise. After about 45 minutes, the dough has risen and is ready to bake. I'm putting the loaf of bread into my preheated 350 degrees Fahrenheit oven for about 30 minutes. At 30 minutes, I'll check the internal temperature to see that it reads 190 degrees Fahrenheit. If it does, the bread is ready. After 30 minutes, I'm testing the internal temperature of my bread, and it reads 190 degrees Fahrenheit. With the bread fresh out of the oven, I like to take a pat of butter and just rub it across the crust. As it melts, it makes the crust glossy, it softens it, makes it delicious. This is a trick that my grandmother taught me, and I continue to do it. And you'll want to pop your bread out of its pan to cool on a wire rack. And there you have it, a beautiful loaf of honey oat bread. Now that our loaf has completely cooled, let's cut into it and look at the texture and see how the oat and honey bread comes out when we cook it in the oven, but let the bread machine do all the work. I like to use a serrated knife. You want a nice knife that will cut through your bread without mauling it. You don't want it to collapse on you. And there you can see the texture is great. Cut another slice. Pretty tender. It's very nice. Great texture, nice and soft. You're going to want to make some honey oat bread in your bread machine. To store your honey oat bread, wrap it tightly in some plastic wrap. Just pull it up around it. Fold down the sides. And you'll find that it will keep nicely on your counter for a couple of days, if it lasts that long, or for longer, store it in your fridge. Enjoy!